I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here telling a story like this. Hell, for the longest time, I wouldn't talk about it at all. Not to the docs at the VA, not to my wife of 47 years, not to anybody. But time has a way of wearing down even the toughest resistances. And at 87, I figure I've got more days behind me than ahead. Maybe it's time. Korea, the forgotten war, they call it now, sandwiched between the glory of World War II and the controversy of Vietnam. But I haven't forgotten. Not a single frozen night or blood-soaked day of it, especially not that night in November 1950, when I died on a nameless hill and came back with something I've carried inside me ever since. Before I get into all that, you should know who you're listening to. My name is James Harrington, though nobody called me that in the service. It was always Harry, or sometimes Georgia, on account of where I grew up. I was 20 years old when I shipped out. Just a farm boy from outside Atlanta who'd never been farther than Savannah until Uncle Sam came calling. I wasn't supposed to be in Korea at all. I'd enlisted in '48 after high school, thinking I'd learn a trade, see a bit of the world, then come home and take over my daddy's farm with some skills under my belt. The war was over after all, the big one. The war to end all wars, again. But history has a cruel sense of humor, doesn't it? I was stationed in Japan with the 24th Infantry Division when North Korea crossed the 38th parallel. Within days, we were on transport ships heading for Busan. Green troops, most of us. Training exercises and occupation duty hadn't prepared us for what was coming. Those first few months, I don't know if words can really capture it. The retreat south, the Busan perimeter, MacArthur's Incheon landing, pushing north again. It was like being caught in some giant's game of tug-of-war, only the rope was made of men's lives. My unit was part of the push toward the Yalu River in the fall of 1950. Spirits were high. The brass talked about being home by Christmas. We believed them because we wanted to, because the alternative was too grim to consider. I remember the weather changing, getting colder by the day. The first snow fell in October. By November, temperatures were dropping to 20 below at night. We joked that we were fighting two enemies, the North Koreans and the cold. The joke stopped being funny when men started losing toes and fingers to frostbite. We had these cotton shoe packs that were useless in that weather. Your feet would sweat during the day, then the sweat would freeze at night. The smart ones among us slept with our boots inside our sleeping bags. The others learned the hard way. I wrote letters home every chance I got. Told my folks about the beauty of the Korean countryside when it wasn't being torn apart by artillery. Told my girl Sarah that I'd be home soon and we'd go ahead with those plans we'd made. Didn't tell any of them about the things I was seeing. The refugees streaming south with everything they owned on their backs. The villages burned to nothing. The bodies, civilian and military both, frozen solid by the roadside. There was this one time I was on patrol, and we passed through what used to be a small farming village. Nothing left but blackened foundations and walls. I found a child's toy, a little wooden horse, somehow untouched among all that destruction. I picked it up thinking I might send it home, something to remind me there was innocence in the world. Our sergeant saw me and barked, "Put that down, Georgia. Everything here could be booby-trapped." I dropped it like it was on fire. Wasn't until later I realized how perfect that moment was. A metaphor for the whole damn war. Even the innocent things could kill you. By mid-November, we were deep in North Korea. The Chinese had entered the war, though we didn't know it yet. Not really. There were reports, rumors, but nothing official. We were telling ourselves we'd be pushing to the Yalu and then home. Our company was assigned to secure and hold a hill, just one of countless anonymous hills that men fought and died for in that war. It didn't even have a proper name, just a designation on the map, Hill 329. It overlooked a road junction the brass deemed strategically important. The hill wasn't much to look at. Rocky, sparsely wooded with scrubby pines bent from the constant wind. But in war, terrain is everything. High ground means survival. We dug in as best we could, though the ground was hard as iron from the cold. Used entrenching tools, bayonets, even mess kits when we had to. Fingers bleeding inside our gloves, breath freezing in our scarves. My foxhole buddy was a kid named Tommy Reynolds from Philadelphia. 19 years old, always talking about the cheesesteaks he was going to eat when he got home. He had a picture of his mother he kept in his helmet liner. Sweet lady with the same wide smile as Tommy. We made a pact to visit each other after the war. I'd show him Georgia peaches. He'd buy me a Philly cheesesteak. "Harry," he said that night as we huddled together for warmth, "you ever wonder if we're just pawns in some big game?" "Don't go philosophical on me, Tommy," I said, rubbing my hands together. It's too damn cold for thinking. He laughed, that easy laugh of his. My old man fought in the Pacific, came home different, told me war makes philosophers of grunts and cynics of officers. Your old man sounds like he knew his stuff. Yeah, Tommy went quiet for a moment. He died last year. Never got to see me in uniform. He'd be proud. I said, though it felt like such a small thing to offer. Maybe, Tommy shrugged. Or maybe he'd think I was a damn fool for volunteering. We fell silent after that, listening to the wind howling across the hilltop, carrying stinging ice particles that felt like razor blades on any exposed skin. The night was clear, stars brilliant in that cold air like I'd never seen before or since. It's funny the details you remember. The attack came just before dawn, when the human body is at its lowest ebb and the mind most vulnerable. I'd finally managed to doze off, dreaming of summer in Georgia, when the night erupted with whistles and bugles. That sound, God, I still hear it sometimes when I wake suddenly in the night. It wasn't like our bugles. It had a different quality, alien and chilling. The Chinese used them as psychological warfare, and let me tell you, it worked. There's something primal about that sound cutting through darkness and gunfire that turns your blood to ice. Tommy grabbed my arm. Jesus Christ, what is that? Before I could answer, our sergeant was shouting, "Incoming! Everybody up! They're coming up the north slope." We scrambled to our positions, fingers clumsy with cold as we readied our weapons. I was a barman, Browning automatic rifle, heavier than the standard M1s most guys carried, but with more firepower. Tommy fed me ammo belts when I needed them. The first wave hit us like a human tide, shadowy figures charging uphill through the pre-dawn gloom, seeming to appear from nowhere. We opened fire, the muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness in strobes, catching frozen images of men in quilted uniforms. There's so many of them. Tommy whispered beside me, his voice high with tension. He wasn't wrong. For everyone that fell, 3 more seemed to take his place. Our line was holding, but barely. The air filled with the smell of cordite and the distinctive metallic tang of blood, freezing almost instantly in the cold. I don't know how long that first engagement lasted. Time does strange things in combat. Minutes stretch to hours, hours compressed to heartbeats. Eventually they pulled back, leaving their dead and wounded scattered on the hillside. There was no time to feel relief. We knew they'd be back. "Ammo check," our sergeant called. "And check your buddies. Anyone hit, speak up now." We'd been lucky. A few minor wounds, nothing serious. But we'd burned through almost half our ammunition. Supply lines were stretched thin, and resupply wasn't guaranteed. The sky was lightening now, revealing the carnage on the slope below us. Dead and dying men lay contorted on the frozen ground. Some were still moving, their cries carrying up to us on the wind. "Don't look," said Jenkins, a corporal from Texas who'd fought in the Pacific. "Just don't look at him." But you couldn't help it. You couldn't help thinking that each of those men had a Tommy somewhere, with a picture of his mother in his helmet. The day dragged on, punctuated by sporadic small arms fire. They hit us twice more before nightfall, probing attacks, testing our defenses and resolve. We held, but each time they came a little closer, and each time we had less to push them back with. By dusk, we knew we were in serious trouble. No reinforcements had arrived. Communications were spotty at best. We were running desperately low on ammunition, and the temperature was plummeting as night fell. Our lieutenant, a young West Pointer named Carroll, gathered the squad leaders. I wasn't among them, but I was close enough to hear. "We've got orders to hold this position," he said, his breath clouding around his face. "Battalion's trying to get reinforcements to us, but they're tied up all along the line. We're on our own for tonight at least." Sergeant Decker, a hard case who'd survived the Battle of the Bulge, spat into the snow. "With all due respect, sir, we can't hold against another major assault. Not with what we've got left." "Those are our orders, Sergeant," Carroll replied, but I could see the worry in his young face. He couldn't have been more than 24. "Yes, sir," Decker said, but he exchanged glances with the other NCOs, the kind that said volumes without words. Back in our foxhole, Tommy and I shared the last of our rations, a chocolate bar so frozen we had to suck on it like hard candy. "You know what I was thinking about today, between attacks?" Tommy said, his face bluish in the fading light. What's that?" "My kid brother's birthday is next week. I got him a baseball glove before I shipped out. Had my mom hide it. Real nice one too. Cost me nearly a month's pay." He smiled at the memory. "He's gonna think I forgot. You'll be home for Christmas?" I said, repeating the line we'd all been fed. "You can give it to him yourself." Tommy just looked at me, and I saw in his eyes that he didn't believe it any more than I did. We tried to sleep in shifts, but it was almost impossible in that cold. You drift into a shallow doze only to be jolted awake by the pain in your extremities, the fear that if you slept too deeply, you might not wake up at all. It was just past midnight when they hit us again. This time there was no bugle warning, no whistles. Just suddenly they were there, swarming up the hill from all sides this time. Not just the north. They'd infiltrated around our position in the darkness. "They're behind us!" someone shouted, and then all hell broke loose. I emptied the bar into the shapes rushing our position, Tommy frantically reloading for me. But they kept coming, wave after human wave. When the bar ran out of ammunition entirely, I switched to my sidearm, a .45 caliber pistol. Our line was disintegrating. Men were fighting in isolated pockets now. No cohesion, just desperate struggles in the darkness. I heard the lieutenant shouting orders, trying to rally us. Then his voice cut off abruptly. "We've got to move," I yelled to Tommy. "We're being overrun." We abandoned our foxhole, trying to make our way to what sounded like a concentration of American fire to our right. That's when it happened. 3 figures materialized out of the darkness right in front of us. I fired twice, dropping 2 of them, but my pistol clicked empty on the 3rd. There's a moment in combat that's like nothing else on earth. When you're out of ammunition, when there's nowhere to run, when you're face to face with someone who wants to kill you, time slows to a crawl. Every detail burns into your brain with photographic clarity. I saw his face, this Chinese soldier. Young, probably younger than me, his breath clouding in the frigid air. The way his eyes widened slightly when he realized I couldn't shoot anymore. The bayonet fixed to his rifle, the moonlight catching its edge as he lunged. I dropped the empty pistol and stepped into him, inside the arc of the bayonet thrust, grabbing the rifle barrel with my left hand. It was a move they'd taught us in basic training, but I'd never had to use it until that moment. The barrel was ice cold, burning my palm even through my glove. We grappled for control of the rifle, spinning in a grotesque dance. He was smaller than me, but wiry and strong. I managed to wrench the rifle away, but in doing so, I lost my balance on the frozen ground. We both went down, rolling in the snow. All around us, the battle raged. Muzzle flashes, screams, the thud of grenades. But in our small circle of combat, it was reduced to grunts and gasps. The scrape of boots on frozen earth, the desperate struggle to survive. He pulled a knife from somewhere. I caught his wrist as he tried to drive it down into my chest. For what seemed like an eternity, we were locked there, his weight on top of me, the knife trembling between us as we each exerted maximum force. I was stronger, and slowly the knife began to move away from me, back toward him. I saw panic flicker in his eyes, then resolve. He said something in his language, a prayer maybe, or a curse, and suddenly shifted his weight, throwing himself sideways. The unexpected movement caught me off guard. I lost my grip on his wrist and the knife came free. I rolled desperately, feeling the blade slice across my back rather than plunging into it. Pain flared, hot and immediate, but the cold air seemed to numb it almost instantly. We both scrambled to our feet. I was bleeding. I could feel the warm wetness spreading across my back, quickly cooling in the frigid air. But adrenaline kept the worst of the pain at bay. He came at me again, knife held low, looking for an opening. That's when Tommy appeared out of nowhere, swinging his rifle like a club. The butt caught the Chinese soldier on the side of the head, sending him staggering. I didn't hesitate. I charged forward, tackling him around the waist, driving him back. We crashed into something, a rock or a tree stump, I never knew which, and went down hard. The impact drove the breath from my lungs. The knife came up again, and this time I couldn't stop it. The pain was nothing like I expected. Not the sharp burning sensation I'd anticipated, but an odd pressure, a sense of wrongness as the blade slid between my ribs. Then the burning came, radiating outward from the point of entry, and with it, a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. I heard Tommy shout something, saw the rifle butt come down again, connecting with the man's head with a sound like a melon splitting. And then Tommy was there, pulling me up, his face contorted with fear. "Harry! Oh God, Harry, you're hit!" I couldn't speak. My mouth worked, but no sound came out. I looked down and saw the knife still embedded in my chest, just below my heart. Strangely, I felt no urge to pull it out. Some dim part of my brain remembered the training. Leave it in. Removing it could cause more bleeding. Tommy half carried, half dragged me toward what remained of our lines. I was aware of his voice, a constant stream of encouragement and fear. "Stay with me, Harry. Just a little further. Medic! We need a medic here." My vision was tunneling, the edges going dark. I tasted copper in my mouth. Every breath was agony, a wet, bubbling sensation that told me the knife had probably punctured a lung. We stumbled into a group of Americans who had formed a defensive perimeter near the crest of the hill. Sergeant Decker was there, bleeding from a head wound but still on his feet, still directing fire. "Medic!" Tommy screamed again as he lowered me to the ground. The company medic, a kid named Shapiro who'd wanted to be a doctor before the war, appeared beside me. His hands moved quickly, assessing the wound, his face telling me everything I needed to know before he spoke. "I need to remove the knife," he said, his voice calm but his eyes betraying his concern. "It's going to hurt, but I have to see how bad it is." I tried to nod, managed a small movement of my head. He gave me a piece of leather to bite down on, a belt, I think, and then gripped the knife handle. The pain when he pulled it out was indescribable. White hot, all-consuming. I must have screamed, but I don't remember it. What I do remember is the look that passed between Shapiro and Tommy. That look that medical personnel try to hide from the critically wounded, but rarely succeed. "Hang in there, Harry," Shapiro said, pressing a bandage against the wound. "We're going to get you out of here." But his voice lacked conviction, and I knew. I knew in that moment that I wasn't going to make it off that hill. A strange calm settled over me with that realization. The fear didn't disappear, but it receded, like it was happening to someone else. Tommy stayed beside me, holding my hand. Around us, the battle continued to rage, but it seemed distant now, like I was hearing it through water. I was so cold, colder than I'd ever been. But oddly, it didn't bother me anymore. "Tell my folks." I started but coughed, feeling fluid bubble up in my throat. "You'll tell them yourself," Tommy insisted, squeezing my hand. "Reinforcements are coming. You just gotta hold on." I tried to smile, tasting blood. "My sister's birthday, April 12th. Got a gift in my footlocker. Make sure she gets it." Tommy's face crumpled. "Don't talk like that, Harry. You're gonna be fine." But I wasn't. I could feel my body shutting down, system by system. My extremities were numb now, not from the cold, but from blood loss. Each breath was shallower than the last, harder to draw. The sky above was clearing, stars appearing between racing clouds. I focused on them, those distant points of light so cold and beautiful. I thought about home, about Georgia summers, about Sarah waiting for me. I thought about my parents and how they would receive the telegram. I thought about all the things I would never do, never see. And then something strange happened. The pain began to recede, not gradually but all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. The cold disappeared too. In its place came a warmth that spread from my center outward. I remember thinking, this must be what dying feels like, and being surprised at how peaceful it was. Not at all what I'd feared. Tommy's face hovered above me, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him anymore. The sounds of battle had faded completely. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, slowing, each thud more distant than the last. My vision began to change. Not darkening as I'd expected, but brightening. A light seemed to be growing all around me, not coming from anywhere specific, but simply intensifying everywhere at once. And then, this is the part I've struggled for decades to put into words, I wasn't on that hill anymore. Or rather, I was, but I was also somewhere else simultaneously. I could still see Tommy bending over my body, could see Shapiro working frantically, could see the battle raging around them, but I was seeing it from above, as if I were floating. I felt no connection to the body on the ground. That wasn't me anymore. It was just a shell I'd occupied. The real me, whatever that was expanding, becoming less defined, merging with the light that continued to grow. And then it happened. What people who've never experienced it call life flashing before your eyes. But that phrase doesn't begin to capture the reality. It wasn't a flash. It wasn't even sequential. It was as if every moment of my life was happening simultaneously, and I was experiencing all of them at once. Not just remembering, reliving. Every joy, every sorrow, every triumph, every failure. But I wasn't just experiencing them from my perspective. I was somehow feeling them from the perspective of everyone involved. I felt my mother's joy and pain as she gave birth to me. I felt my father's pride and fear as he taught me to drive the tractor. I felt Sarah's love when we kissed for the first time, but also her uncertainty. More than that, I felt the ripple effects of my actions throughout my life. The time I'd been cruel to a classmate in 3rd grade, I felt his hurt, saw how it affected his confidence for years afterward. The time I'd helped an elderly neighbor after a storm, I felt how that simple act had restored her faith in people. It wasn't judgmental. There was no sense of being weighed or found wanting. It was simply truth, laid bare, with all artifice and self-deception stripped away. I saw myself as I truly was, not the hero I sometimes pretended to be in my own mind, nor the failure I sometimes feared I was, but simply human, flawed, complicated, capable of great kindness and casual cruelty. And in that moment of perfect self-knowledge, I felt completely known and completely accepted. The light that surrounded me wasn't just illumination, it was conscious, aware. It knew me better than I knew myself, and it loved me anyway. Not despite my flaws, but including them as integral parts of who I was. I can't tell you how long this experience lasted. Time had no meaning there. It could have been seconds or centuries. Then something changed. The light condensed, took form. Not a human form, not exactly, but something I could comprehend as a presence. And from this presence came not words, but pure meaning, unfiltered by language. "It's not your time," was the essence of it. Not spoken, not even thought in the way we understand thoughts, but communicated directly to my consciousness. I felt resistance well up in me. Why go back? Here was peace, understanding, acceptance. Back there was pain, cold, fear, and likely death anyway. Again, that communication without words. "You haven't finished what you came to do." I didn't understand. What was I meant to do? What purpose could be served by sending me back to die more slowly, more painfully? The presence seemed to expand, as if to embrace me. In that embrace, I felt a sense of the interconnectedness of all things. Every life touching every other life, an infinite web of relationships and impacts. I just glimpsed, a pattern so vast and complex that my human mind couldn't begin to comprehend it. But I understood that I was part of it, that my life and death had meaning within that pattern. And I understood something else too, that I had a choice. I could stay, dissolve into that light, become part of whatever greater reality it represented. Or I could return for reasons I didn't fully comprehend, but had to take on faith. I hesitated. The pull of that light, that peace, was almost irresistible. But there was something else too, a sense of unfinished business, of promises not yet kept. I thought of Tommy, of my family waiting for me, of Sarah. Before I could consciously decide, I felt myself being drawn back, moving away from the light, back toward the cold and the pain and the body I'd so recently left behind. The transition was jarring. One moment I was embraced by light and understanding. The next I was slammed back into a broken body on a frozen hillside in Korea. The pain returned instantly, a shock after the painlessness I'd just experienced. The cold too, and the sounds of battle. I gasped, a wet, ragged sound that brought Tommy's face jerking back to mine. His eyes widened in shock. "Harry? Jesus Christ, Harry." Shapiro appeared in my field of vision, his expression shifting from resignation to disbelief to focused determination. "He's back. I don't know how, but he's back. We need to move him now." I tried to speak, to tell them what I'd experienced, but all that came out was a weak moan. Tommy squeezed my hand, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. "You hold on, Harry. You hear me? You hold on." I wanted to tell him that it was okay, that I'd seen what waited on the other side, and it was beautiful. But I couldn't form the words. My body was too damaged, too weak. Around us, the battle was turning. Reinforcements had arrived, another company that had fought its way up to our position. The Chinese were falling back, retreating down the hill they'd fought so hard to take. I drifted in and out of consciousness as they evacuated me. Snippets of memory, being carried on a stretcher, the jolting agony of movement. A helicopter, its rotors thundering overhead, voices urgent but distant, the antiseptic smell of a MASH unit, surgery, the masked face of a doctor leaning over me, saying something I couldn't quite catch, the blessed relief of morphine flooding my system, and then nothing. Darkness without dreams. I later learned that I'd died twice more on the operating table. Flatlined, they said. Each time they'd managed to bring me back, though the doctors couldn't explain how I'd survived at all. The knife had nicked my heart, punctured my lung, and I'd lost so much blood that by all rights, I should never have made it off that hill, let alone through surgery. I spent 2 months in a hospital in Japan, recovering. The physical wounds healed faster than anyone expected, though I was left with scars and diminished lung capacity that would affect me for the rest of my life. But the experience itself, the dying, the light, the life review, that changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand 70 years later. When I was strong enough, I wrote to Tommy. His unit had been pulled back from the front by then. He came to visit me in the hospital, hardly able to believe I was alive. "You were gone, Harry," he told me sitting by my bedside. "You stopped breathing. No pulse. Shapiro pronounced you dead. And then you just came back, started breathing again. He shook his head, still bewildered by it. I've never seen anything like it. None of us had. I tried to tell him what I'd experienced, but the words felt inadequate, like describing a symphony to someone who'd never heard music. And I could see in his eyes that while he wanted to believe me, it was hard for him to accept. I didn't blame him. If someone had told me a similar story before it happened to me, I'd have thought they were confused from trauma or medication. So I kept most of it to myself. Told the doctors I didn't remember anything from when I was out. Told my family the same when they finally let them know I was wounded, but recovering. It was easier that way. I didn't want to be known as the guy who'd lost his mind in Korea, who'd come back with crazy stories about the afterlife. But I remembered every detail. The light, the life review, the presence, the message. You haven't finished what you came to do. For years after I came home, I tried to figure out what that meant. What was I supposed to do? What purpose had been served by sending me back? I looked for signs, for guidance, but found none. I went back to Georgia, back to Sarah. We got married in the spring of 1952, bought a small farm near where I grew up, had children, 3 of them, built a life together. From the outside, I was just another Korea vet who'd come home, settled down, moved on. But inside, I carried that experience with me every day. It changed how I saw everything. Death, life, purpose, meaning. I knew there was something more waiting for us. Not believed, knew. And that knowledge gave me a peace that nothing could shake, even during the hardest times. Tommy and I stayed in touch. He survived Korea, came home, married his high school sweetheart, invited me up to Philadelphia, bought me that cheesesteak he'd always talked about. We never discussed what happened on that hill again. Not directly, though sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with a question in his eyes. It wasn't until decades later, at my granddaughter's college graduation, that I began to understand why I'd been sent back. The ceremony was being held outdoors, a beautiful May morning. I was sitting next to Sarah, watching our granddaughter cross the stage, when everything around me seemed to shift, like a camera lens coming into focus. The light that day was particular, golden, rich, illuminating everything it touched. And in that moment, I saw the connections again, the web of relationships and impacts that I'd glimpsed during my NDE. I saw how my life had touched others, how those lives had touched still more, rippling outward in ways I could never have predicted. I saw my children, who wouldn't have existed if I'd stayed in that light. My grandchildren. The lives they'd touched would touch. The farm that had thrived under our care, feeding hundreds over the years. The community we'd helped build. Sarah must have sensed something because she took my hand, looking at me with concern. "James, are you all right?" I squeezed her hand, tears in my eyes. "I'm fine, just fine." And I was. For the first time in 40 years, I understood. I hadn't been sent back to do one specific thing, some grand mission that would change the world. I'd been sent back to live, simply live, because my living would create ripples that would affect countless other lives in ways large and small. That night, I finally told Sarah everything. All of it, the light, the life review, the message. I expected skepticism, maybe even concern for my mental state. Instead, she listened with absolute attention, and when I was done, she kissed me gently. "I've always known there was something," she said, "something you carried with you that you couldn't share. I'm glad you finally did." Since then, I've told the story a few more times. To my children, when they were old enough to understand. To a few close friends who I thought might need to hear it. Never publicly until now. Why now? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe because at 87, I feel the thinning of the veil between this world and whatever lies beyond. Maybe because in a world that seems increasingly chaotic and meaningless, people need to hear that there is meaning, that we are all connected, that what we do matters. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe I'm just finally ready to speak my truth, without fear of judgment or disbelief. I don't know what happens next. None of us do, really. But I'm not afraid of death anymore. I've been there. I've seen what waits on the other side. And while I'm in no hurry to leave this life, there are still grandchildren to watch grow, still mornings to wake up beside Sarah. I know that when my time truly comes, it will be a homecoming, not an end. That's the message I brought back from that frozen hill in Korea. Death is not the end. Love continues. We are all connected in ways we can barely comprehend. And every life, every action, matters in the great pattern of existence. I've lived with that knowledge for 70 years now. It's changed everything and nothing. I still get up each morning, still do the work that needs doing, still lose my temper sometimes and say things I regret. I'm still human, with all the flaws and failings that entails. But beneath it all is that certainty, that peace. The light is waiting. And when it's truly my time to go, I'll welcome it like an old friend. That's my story. What you make of it is up to you. But I'll tell you this much. When you've died and come back, you stop worrying so much about what others think. You just tell the truth as you know it, and let the chips fall where they may. I've been thinking a lot about time lately. When you get to be my age, you start to see it differently. Not as this linear thing marching forward relentlessly, but as something more fluid, more like a river with currents and eddies, places where it rushes forward and places where it almost seems to stand still. That night on Hill 329 was one of those places where time folded in on itself for me, where past, present, and future all existed simultaneously, where I glimpsed something beyond the veil of ordinary existence. I've told you what happened, but I haven't really told you what it meant. What it's meant for the 70 years since. How do you live after you've died? How do you walk through this world when you know, with absolute certainty, that there's another one waiting? That's the part of the story I'm still figuring out, even now. After Korea, they shipped me stateside to finish my recovery at a VA hospital in Atlanta, close enough for my family to visit, which was both a blessing and a challenge. How do you explain to your mother why you're not afraid anymore? How do you tell your father that you've seen something that changes everything without sounding like your mind's been affected? So I didn't. I talked about the physical wounds, joked about the hospital food, promised I'd be up and about in no time, kept the rest locked inside. The doctors couldn't explain my survival. The medical file used words like miraculous and unprecedented. The knife had penetrated my chest wall between the fourth and fifth ribs, nicked the pericardium, the sac around the heart, punctured my left lung, and caused massive internal bleeding. By all medical understanding, I should have died within minutes. Instead, here I was, healing faster than anyone expected. Vitals strong, cognition intact. You must have someone watching over you, one of the nurses told me. I just smiled. If she only knew. They gave me the Purple Heart, of course. Put some other medals on my chest too before they discharged me in the summer of '51. Told me I was a hero, but I didn't feel like one. Heroes sacrifice. Heroes save others. All I'd done was get stabbed and have an experience I couldn't explain to anyone. Coming home to Georgia was disorienting. Everything looked the same. The red clay roads, the pine forests, my parents' farmhouse with its sagging front porch. But nothing felt the same. Or rather, I didn't feel the same in relation to it all. Like I was a different shaped puzzle piece trying to fit back into the same old puzzle. Sarah noticed it first. She'd waited for me, just like she promised. Wrote me letters every week I was in Korea and then in the hospital. Came to visit as soon as they allowed it, bringing homemade cookies and news from our small town. I'd been afraid things would be different between us, and they were, but not in the way I'd feared. There's something different about you, she said during one of our first walks after I got home. We were strolling down by Miller's Creek, where we'd spent so many summer evenings before the war. It's in your eyes, like you're looking at everything from a distance. I tried to deny it, but Sarah had always been able to see through me. I'm just adjusting, I told her. The doctor said it's normal. They call it or adjustment syndrome, or something fancy like that. She stopped walking and turned to face me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. James Harrington, don't you lie to me. This isn't just war. This is something else. For a wild moment, I considered telling her everything. About the light, the life review, the choice to return. But I couldn't find the words. How do you describe colors to someone who's been blind from birth? I died, Sarah, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Up on that hill, I died and something happened. I expected her to pull away, to look at me with concern or even fear. Instead, she stepped closer. Tell me, she said simply. So I did. Not everything, I couldn't articulate it all yet, but more than I'd told anyone. About the knife, about leaving my body, about the incredible peace I'd felt. I didn't mention the life review or the message. Those felt too personal, too complex to share even with her. When I finished, we stood in silence by the creek, the late afternoon sun dappling through the trees, casting shifting patterns on the water. I waited for her reaction, bracing myself for disbelief or dismissal. My grandmother used to talk about things like that, she said finally. She was from the old country, Hungary. They have different ideas about death there. She always said the veil between worlds is thinner than most people think. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it wasn't rejection either. It was space. Space to hold my experience without judgment, without needing to categorize it. In that moment, I fell in love with Sarah all over again. We got married that December. Small ceremony in her parents' living room. Just family and a few close friends. Tommy came down from Philadelphia, still looking a little haunted around the eyes, but trying hard to find his way back to normal life, just like the rest of us. "Never thought I'd see you standing here," he whispered to me before the ceremony, adjusting my tie with unsteady hands. "Not after that night. Makes two of us," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I knew he was remembering. The blood, the cold, the moment when I stopped breathing. "You ever think about it?" he asked quietly. "Every day," I admitted. He nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. "Me too. Can't make sense of it. Not sure we're meant to," I said. Tommy considered this, then shrugged. "Maybe not, but I'll tell you one thing, Harry. Whatever happened up there, I'm glad you came back." I hugged him then. This man who'd held my hand while I died, who'd never stopped believing I could return. "Me too, Tommy," I said. "Me too." Sarah and I used the money I'd saved during my service, combined with a small inheritance from her grandfather, to buy 40 acres adjacent to my parents' farm. The land wasn't much, rocky in parts with soil that needed work, but it was ours. We built a small house with our own hands and the help of neighbors, planted our first crops in the spring of '52, started building a life together. On the surface, it probably looked like any other young farm couple's life in rural Georgia in the 1950s. Up before dawn, working until dark, struggling with weather and pests and market prices, celebrating small victories, enduring setbacks. We had our first child in '53, a daughter we named Eleanor after my mother. A son, Michael, followed in '55, and another daughter, Catherine, in '59. But beneath that ordinary surface, something else was happening. Something I couldn't quite name, but could feel reshaping me from the inside out. The experience on that hill hadn't faded with time, as I'd half expected it would. Instead, it had taken root in me, growing stronger, informing every aspect of how I moved through the world. I found myself noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The intricate pattern of veins in a leaf, the way light changed the character of the landscape throughout the day, the complex emotions that crossed a person's face during conversation. It was as if dying had somehow made me more alive, more present in each moment. And there were other changes too, a deep-seated patience that hadn't been there before, a strange lack of fear about things that used to terrify me. Financial worries, storms that threatened the crops, the Cold War tensions that had everyone building fallout shelters. None of it seemed to touch that core of peace I'd brought back with me. "You're the calmest man I've ever known," our neighbor Frank Jenkins told me once after a tornado had torn through the county, destroying barns and equipment, but somehow sparing our houses. Everyone else was shaken, frantically assessing damage and making plans for repairs. I was too, but there was a part of me standing apart, observing it all, with a kind of detached compassion. "What's your secret?" Frank asked, genuinely curious. I looked at him, a good man, a deacon at the local Baptist church, someone who took his faith seriously. "Ever read that part in Philippians?" I asked. "The peace that passes understanding?" He nodded slowly. "You saying you found religion, James?" "Not exactly," I replied. "More like it found me." That was as close as I could come to explaining it to most people. It wasn't religion in the conventional sense. It wasn't about doctrines or denominations. But it was faith of a sort, not belief, but knowledge. Knowledge that had been scarred into my soul on that frozen hill. The 1950s gave way to the 1960s. The world seemed to accelerate, changing faster than many people could adapt. Civil rights marches in our own state. Vietnam escalating half a world away. Men walking on the moon. Through it all, our little farm prospered, almost in defiance of the odds. We weren't rich by any means, but we were comfortable. We expanded from 40 acres to 80, then to 120, added cattle to our crops. I became known in the community as someone people could turn to in a crisis. Not because I had all the answers, Lord knows I didn't, but because I could sit with them in their pain without needing to fix it or flee from it. There's something about having faced your own death that makes others' suffering less frightening to witness. When old Mrs. Calloway was dying of cancer in '65, her daughter asked me to sit with her one night when she couldn't be there. I barely knew the woman, but I went anyway. Mrs. Calloway was afraid. You could see it in her eyes, in the way her hands clutched at the sheets. Death was coming for her, and unlike me, she hadn't had a preview of what waited on the other side. "I don't want to go," she whispered, her voice thin and reedy with pain despite the morphine. I took her hand, those bird-like bones so fragile under paper-thin skin. I know, I said. It's scary. The pastor says I'm going to heaven, she said. But what if he's wrong? What if there's nothing? In that moment, I made a decision. This wasn't about me or my reluctance to talk about my experience. This was about a frightened woman facing the great unknown. Mrs. Calloway, I said gently, I've been there. Her roomy eyes focused on me with sudden intensity. What do you mean? So I told her. Not everything, but enough. About the light, the peace, the sense of being known and loved completely. It doesn't hurt, I assured her. And you're not alone. There's someone waiting to welcome you home. She didn't say anything for a long time after I finished. Just lay there, her breathing labored, but her face more relaxed than it had been. Thank you, she said finally. I believe you. She died 3 days later. Her daughter told me she went peacefully, without the fear that had marked her final weeks. Whatever you said to her, she told me it made a difference. That was the first time I shared my experience in order to help someone else. It wouldn't be the last. The years continued to pass. Our children grew. Eleanor, our eldest, showed an aptitude for science that surprised everyone in our rural community. She eventually went to Emory University on a scholarship, one of the few women in her class studying biology. Michael was more interested in the farm, learning everything I could teach him about the land and its rhythms. Catherine, our youngest, had an artistic temperament that seemed to come out of nowhere in our practical family. She could draw anything she saw with uncanny accuracy, capturing not just the appearance, but somehow the essence of her subjects. I loved watching them grow into themselves, seeing the adults they were becoming. And sometimes in quiet moments, I would remember that other life I'd glimpsed during my NDE. The one where I hadn't come back, where these three remarkable human beings had never existed. The thought was sobering, a reminder of how contingent everything is, how a single moment can change the course of countless lives. Sarah and I grew together through these years, our connection deepening in ways I couldn't have imagined as a young man. She never fully embraced my account of what had happened in Korea. Her pragmatic nature made her cautious about such things, but she never dismissed it either. She accepted that it was real for me and that it had shaped me in fundamental ways. You came back different, she told me on our 20th anniversary as we sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Better, I think. More yourself somehow. I looked at her, this woman who'd walked beside me for 2 decades, who'd seen me at my weakest and my strongest. What do you mean? She considered the question, taking her time as she always did when something mattered. Before Korea, you were restless, always looking ahead to the next thing, never quite here. She reached over and took my hand. After, you were present, fully present in a way most people never manage. Like you understood something the rest of us are still trying to figure out. I squeezed her hand, emotion tightening my throat. I wish I could give you what I was given, I said. The certainty. She smiled, the last rays of sunlight catching in her hair, turning the strands of gray to silver. Maybe someday. But I'm in no hurry. Neither was I. Despite knowing what waited beyond death, I was in no rush to get there. Life, with all its complications and imperfections, had become infinitely precious to me, precisely because I understood its temporary nature. Each moment was a gift to be opened and appreciated, not a burden to be endured until something better came along. But life, as it always does, brought its share of sorrows along with its joys. In 1975, we got word that Tommy had died of a heart attack. 54 years old, gone in an instant while mowing his lawn on a Sunday afternoon. I flew to Philadelphia for the funeral, my first time on a plane, feeling a grief that surprised me with its intensity. Tommy's widow, Mary, hugged me hard at the reception after the burial. He talked about you all the time, she said, his war buddy who came back from the dead. I must have looked startled because she laughed softly. Oh yes, he told me. Not right away, but eventually. Said it was the thing that convinced him there must be something more than just this life. I didn't know, I admitted. In all our phone calls and occasional visits over the years, Tommy had never mentioned telling anyone about what happened on that hill. He wasn't sure you'd want him to talk about it, Mary said. But it gave him comfort, especially this past year when his health started to fail. The thought that death might not be the end. I looked around the room at the mourners. Tommy's grown children, his friends, colleagues from the post office where he'd worked for 30 years. All these lives he'd touched, all these connections he'd made. It's not the end, I said. Just a transition. Mary studied my face. You really believe that, don't you? I do, I said simply. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. I hope you're right. I hope he's somewhere beautiful. He is, I assured her, with a certainty that came from that place beyond words or proof. He is. Tommy's death affected me deeply. He'd been the only other person who'd witnessed my death in return, the only one who could corroborate what had happened that night. With him gone, the experience felt somehow more solitary, more interior. And it made me think about what would happen when my turn came again. When the message I'd received, "You haven't finished what you came to do," was finally fulfilled. What was it I was supposed to do? I'd asked myself that question countless times over the decades. Raised my children, worked the land, tried to be a good husband, father, neighbor, citizen. Was that enough? Was that what I'd been sent back for? I didn't have an answer, and the not knowing sometimes weighed on me. But mostly I trusted that whatever purpose I was meant to serve was unfolding naturally through the life I was living. That I didn't need to force it or figure it out intellectually. The 1980s arrived with their own set of challenges. A severe drought hit Georgia in 1986, pushing many farmers to the brink of bankruptcy. But our farm weathered it better than most, partially because of the sustainable practices I'd implemented years earlier when they were still considered fringe ideas. Crop rotation, water conservation, natural pest management, approaches that seemed obvious to me after seeing the interconnectedness of all things during my NDE, but that many of my neighbors had dismissed as unnecessary complications. "How'd you know to prepare for this?" Frank Jenkins asked me as we stood looking at his withered corn crop, a complete loss after 2 months without rain. My own fields, while stressed, were still producing enough for us to get by. I shrugged. Just seemed like the right thing to do. "Well, I should have listened to you," he said, shaking his head. "You always did see further ahead than the rest of us." It wasn't foresight exactly, more like a different perspective. Seeing things not just in terms of immediate gain, but in their wider context, their place in the greater pattern. That was one of the lasting effects of my experience. An awareness of how everything connects, how actions ripple outward in ways we can't always predict or control. In 1989, our first grandchild was born. Eleanor and her husband David named him James after me. Holding that tiny life in my arms, looking into eyes that seemed far older than their few hours, I felt a surge of that same recognition I'd experienced in the light. That sense of knowing and being known beyond the limitations of physical existence. "Hello, old soul," I whispered to him when we were alone. "Welcome back." More grandchildren followed, 7 in all over the next decade. Each birth felt like a miracle, a testament to the ongoing unfolding of life. And with each one, I found myself thinking about legacy, about what I would leave behind when my time finally came. Not material things, though there would be the farm, of course, and whatever modest savings we'd managed to accumulate, but the intangible inheritance, the values, the stories, the understanding of life and death that had shaped my existence since that night in Korea. How much should I share? When? These questions nagged at me as the grandchildren grew from infants to toddlers to school-age kids full of questions about everything under the sun. I didn't want to burden them with concepts they weren't ready for, but I also didn't want to miss the opportunity to pass on what I'd learned. Sarah, as always, provided the voice of practical wisdom. "Just answer their questions when they ask them," she advised. "They'll let you know when they're ready." And they did. It started with James, the eldest, when he was about 8. We were fishing at the pond on the back 40 acres, just the two of us on a summer morning. Mist rising off the water as the sun burned through the dawn chill. "Grandpa," he said suddenly, "are you afraid to die?" The question caught me off guard, coming as it did in the middle of our conversation about baseball. "What makes you ask that, buddy?" He shrugged, eyes on his bobber floating on the still water. "Mom said great-grandma is probably going to heaven soon. She's afraid. I heard her crying about it." My mother, then in her 90s, was indeed failing, her once sharp mind increasingly clouded by dementia. Eleanor had always been close to her grandmother, and the approaching loss was hitting her hard. "No," I said honestly, "I'm not afraid to die." James looked at me then, his young face serious. "Why not? Everyone's afraid of dying." I weighed my words carefully. This child was old enough to think about death, but young enough that nuance might escape him. "I believe that death isn't the end," I said. "That there's something beautiful waiting for us when our time here is done. Like heaven? Something like that, yes." He considered this, his expression thoughtful beyond his years. "How do you know?" And there it was, the opening I'd been waiting for, perhaps for decades. Not a dramatic moment, not a deathbed confession, but a simple question asked beside a farm pond on an ordinary summer morning. Because I've seen it, I said quietly. James's eyes widened. For real, I confirmed. It happened a long time ago before your mom was born. I was in a war far away, and I was very badly hurt. So badly that for a little while I died. But you came back, he said, stating the obvious with a child's directness. I did, and while I was not gone, I saw something wonderful. I told him a simplified version of my experience, focusing on the peace, the light, the sense of being loved completely. I left out the life review. That concept seemed too complex for an 8-year-old, but I did mention the message about not being finished with what I came to do. Like a mission? He asked, immediately translating it into terms from the superhero comics he loved. I smiled. Yes, I suppose like a mission, though I'm still figuring out exactly what it is. Maybe your mission was to be my grandpa, he suggested with the beautiful logic of childhood. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Maybe it was, buddy. Maybe it was. We sat in silence for a while after that, the conversation shifting to less cosmic topics when a fish finally took his bait. But something had changed between us. A bond formed around a shared secret. And in the years that followed, James would sometimes ask me more questions about my experience, each time digging a little deeper as his understanding grew. The other grandchildren eventually had their own versions of this conversation, each at their own time and in their own way. Some were intensely curious, wanting every detail. Others were more reserved, accepting what I shared, but not asking for more. I let each of them set the pace, honoring their individual journeys. Through the 1990s, our family continued to evolve. Eleanor became a professor of biology at the University of Georgia. Michael took over the primary management of the farm, introducing organic certification and direct-to-consumer sales that increased our profitability while staying true to our values. Catherine moved to New York to pursue her art, her paintings eventually finding homes in galleries and private collections. Sarah and I settled into the rhythms of what they now call the third act of life. We traveled a bit, not extensively, but enough to see some of the places we'd always talked about visiting. The Grand Canyon, Niagara Falls, the coast of Maine. We welcomed the first of our great-grandchildren in 1999, marveling at the continuation of life, at the expanding web of connections that had grown from our union. And through it all, I continued to carry the light inside me. That's how I came to think of it. Not as a memory or even an experience, but as a presence, a reality that existed alongside the material world, informing everything I did and thought and felt. There were times when that light seemed more accessible than others. Moments of transcendent beauty, a sunrise over the fields, the birth of a child, the deep connection of making love with Sarah even in our later years, when the veil between worlds felt tissue thin. And there were darker times too, when the light seemed distant, obscured by the very real pains and disappointments of human existence. In 2001, Sarah was diagnosed with breast cancer. The fear I'd thought I'd conquered came roaring back with a vengeance. Not fear for myself, but for her, for the possibility of losing her, of having to navigate whatever remained of my life without her beside me. The months of treatment that followed were grueling. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. I went with her to every appointment, held her hand through every procedure, watched helplessly as the treatments ravaged her body, even as they fought to save her life. Tell me again, she asked one night as we lay in bed, her body curled against mine, fragile in ways it had never been before. Tell me what you saw. I knew what she meant. In 49 years of marriage, this was the first time she'd ever asked me to describe my near-death experience in detail. I'd offered before, but she'd always said she wasn't ready, that she needed to find her own way to those truths. So I told her everything, all of it, the light, the life review, the presence, the message, the choice to return. I spoke for over an hour, searching for words to convey what had always seemed beyond language, stopping only when my voice grew hoarse. Sarah listened without interrupting, her eyes closed, her breathing steady. When I finally fell silent, she remained quiet for so long that I thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear. I believe you, she said. All of it. I tightened my arms around her, careful of the surgical site that was still tender. What changed? I asked. She was quiet for another moment, gathering her thoughts. Facing my own mortality, I suppose. And watching you all these years, living with this certainty that shaped you without hardening you. She shifted slightly so she could look into my eyes. If anyone else had told me this story, I'd have thought they were confused or seeking attention or just trying to make sense of a traumatic experience. But you've never needed any of that. You've just known and lived from that knowing. I kissed her forehead, overwhelmed by a love that had only deepened with time. I'm still the same flawed man you married, I reminded her. Yes, she agreed with a small smile. But a flawed man carrying something extraordinary inside him, something real. Sarah survived the cancer. 5 years later, her doctors pronounced her cured. But the experience changed both of us. For Sarah, it brought a new openness to spiritual possibilities she'd always held at arm's length. For me, it was a stark reminder that even with what I knew about what lay beyond death, life itself, this particular life, with this particular woman, was precious beyond measure. As we moved into our 70s, then our 80s, we gradually stepped back from active involvement in the farm, though we continued to live in the house we'd built as newlyweds, now expanded and modernized by our children and grandchildren. Our days took on a gentler rhythm: morning coffee on the porch, afternoons reading or visiting with family, evenings watching the sun set over the fields that had sustained us for so many decades. It was during this period that Sarah encouraged me to start sharing my story more widely. There are people who need to hear it, she said. People who are afraid, who think death is the end of everything. Most people won't believe me, I pointed out. They'll think I'm just a confused old man. Some won't believe, she acknowledged, but some will. Some need to. So I began cautiously at first. I spoke to our church's grief support group, many of whom had lost spouses or children and were struggling to find meaning in their continued existence. The reception was mixed, as I'd expected. Some found comfort in my account. Others were skeptical or even offended that I claimed to know what they saw as God's mysteries. But the ones who were comforted kept coming back, kept asking questions, and they brought others, friends or family members who were facing terminal diagnoses, who were grappling with their own mortality in immediate ways. I never presented myself as having answers or special knowledge. I simply shared what I'd experienced and what I'd come to understand from it. That death is not the end, that love continues, that we are all connected in ways that transcend our physical existence, that whatever awaits us on the other side knows us completely and loves us anyway. Word spread quietly but steadily. People began to seek me out, sometimes traveling considerable distances, to hear my story directly, to ask their questions, to share their fears and hopes. I spoke with believers and atheists, with scientists and mystics, with the devout and the doubtful. I didn't try to convince anyone of anything. I just offered my truth as clearly and honestly as I could express it. In 2015, a graduate student from Emory University contacted me. She was working on a dissertation about near-death experiences, collecting first-hand accounts from people who'd had them. Eleanor, who still had connections at the university, had mentioned my experience to a colleague who passed the information along. The student, a thoughtful young woman named Maya, came to the farm to interview me. She recorded our conversation, asked insightful questions, took meticulous notes. After 3 hours, she sat back, a look of wonder on her face. Your experience matches so many of the core elements reported across cultures and time periods, she told me. The out-of-body perception, the life review, the encounter with light or luminous being, the message or purpose, the choice to return. It's remarkable, especially considering when it happened. What do you mean? I asked. Most of the academic research on NDEs began in the 1970s, with Raymond Moody's work, she explained. Your experience in 1950 predates that by decades. You couldn't have been influenced by cultural expectations or media portrayals of NDEs because they didn't exist yet. I hadn't thought about it that way before. Does that make a difference? I asked. It strengthens the case that these experiences reflect something real, she said. Something that isn't just constructed from cultural narratives or expectations. She paused, a slight flush rising in her cheeks. I'm sorry, I don't mean to analyze your experience as if it's just data. It's clearly been profoundly meaningful for you personally. No need to apologize, I assured her. After all this time, I'm still trying to understand it myself. Any perspective helps. Maya included my account in her dissertation, which was eventually published in an academic journal. That led to more inquiries, from other researchers, from journalists, even from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to include my story in a project about survival of consciousness. I declined most of these requests. At 85, I didn't have the energy for extensive interviews or public appearances. But I did agree to record my story in full, with all the details I could recall, to be archived with a research institute that studied consciousness and spirituality. It felt important to leave a complete record, whatever others might make of it. Through all this late-in-life attention, Sarah remained my anchor, my reality check, my most beloved companion. Even as we both grew frailer physically, our connection deepened in ways I couldn't have imagined in our youth. We'd been together for over 65 years, longer than many people's entire lives. And yet we weren't finished discovering each other. "If I go first," she said to me one night as we lay in bed, her head resting on my shoulder as it had for thousands of nights before. "Will you look for me when it's your turn?" "You know I will," I promised. "But let's not rush it. We've still got time." I meant those words when I said them. But time, as it turns out, had other plans. Sarah died peacefully in her sleep 4 months later, just after our 66th anniversary. Her heart simply stopped, the doctor said. No pain, no struggle, the gentlest possible exit from a life well lived. Even with everything I knew, everything I believed, the loss was devastating. The certainty that death is not the end doesn't insulate you from the grief of separation. The knowledge that love continues doesn't fill the empty space in the bed beside you. The understanding that we're all connected doesn't warm your hands on a cold winter morning when there's no one to share your coffee with. For the first time since that night in Korea, I found myself questioning, not the reality of what I'd experienced that remained unshakable, but its meaning for my daily existence. What good was knowing what waited beyond the veil if I still had to endure this soul-crushing loneliness on this side of it? The answer came, as answers often do, when I least expected it and from an unexpected source. James, my eldest grandchild, now in his 30s, came to stay with me for a few weeks after Sarah's funeral. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance over the fields, he asked me a question. "Grandpa, do you ever regret coming back?" That night in Korea, when you had the choice, the question startled me. In all our conversations about my experience over the years, he'd never asked me that before. "I've wondered," I admitted, "especially these past few weeks without your grandmother. But no, I don't regret it. How could I? If I hadn't come back, none of you would exist. Not your mother, not you, not your children." James nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. But then he said something that shifted everything for me. "It's not just us, though. It's all of it, everything you've done since then. The farm, the community, the people you've helped, especially these past few years, sharing your story." He paused, looking out over the land that had been in our family for 3 generations now. "Mom told me about a woman who came to see you last year. Terminal cancer diagnosis, terrified of dying. She said after talking with you, this woman found peace. Lived her final months without fear, focused on her family instead of her fear." I remembered her. Linda, a school teacher from Macon with 3 young children and a prognosis of 6 months. She'd driven up with her sister, spent an afternoon sitting right where James and I were sitting now, asking question after question about what I'd seen, what I'd felt. I'd answered as honestly as I could, not trying to persuade her of anything, just offering my truth. "Your story matters, Grandpa," James continued. "It's changed lives. Maybe that's what you came back to do. Not one big thing, but hundreds of small ones. Moments of connection, seeds planted that grow in ways you might never see." His words resonated with something I'd glimpsed during my life review. That web of connections and impacts, the ripple effects of our actions extending far beyond what we can perceive. Perhaps my mission wasn't something specific or dramatic. Perhaps it was simply to live, to love, to share what I'd been given when the time was right. The grief didn't disappear after that conversation. I still missed Sarah with an ache that seemed lodged permanently in my chest. But something shifted in how I carried that grief. It became less a burden and more a testament. Evidence of a love so profound that its absence could hurt this much. And I began to notice things I'd been too immersed in my loss to see. The way my great-grandchildren's laughter echoed Sarah's. The gestures and expressions our children had inherited from her. The traditions she'd established that continued to shape our family gatherings. She wasn't gone. She was woven into the fabric of our shared existence. In the years since her death, I've continued sharing my story with those who seek me out, though more selectively now as my energy diminishes. I've had the privilege of sitting with several people in their final days, offering whatever comfort my experience might provide as they prepare for their own transition. Some ask if I'm afraid to die, and I tell them the truth. I'm not afraid of death itself, of what comes after. But I am sometimes apprehensive about the process of dying, about potential pain or loss of dignity. I'm human after all. with all the frailties and fears that entails. What I've seen beyond the veil doesn't exempt me from the vulnerabilities of flesh and blood, but beneath those natural human concerns runs a current of anticipation. Not a desire to hasten the end. I still find too much joy and purpose in this life for that, but a quiet readiness for whatever comes next. A sense that whenever my time truly arrives, I'll recognize it as a homecoming rather than an ending. So that's my story. All of it, as best as I can tell it. What happened that night on Hill 329, and how it's shaped the 70 years since. I don't expect everyone who hears it to believe it or to find meaning in it. We each have our own paths to whatever truths matter most. But for those who've listened, really listened, and found something in my account that speaks to their own questions and fears, I hope it offers what it's given me. Not certainty about specific details of what comes next, but confidence in the essential continuity of our existence. The assurance that love persists beyond physical death. The knowledge that we are known and held by something larger than ourselves. That's the message I brought back from Korea. Not engraved on tablets or detailed in a theological system, but carved into my very being through experience. Death is not the end. Love continues. We are all connected in ways we can barely comprehend. And every life, every action, matters in the great pattern of existence. I don't know how much longer I'll be here to share this message in person. At 87, I'm well aware that my remaining time is limited, but I'm not troubled by that awareness. When my time comes, Sarah will be waiting, and so will that light, that incredible, all-knowing, all-loving light that I glimpsed for just a moment on a frozen hillside in Korea. Until then, I'll continue to live each day as fully as I can, to love as deeply as I'm able, to share what I know when it might help someone else. Because that's what we're here for, I think. Not just to learn and grow ourselves, but to help each other along the way. To be reflections of that light for one another, especially in the darkest times. That's the real mission, the one we all share. To love, to connect, to illuminate the path for those who come after us. And when our time here is complete, to trust that we're not ending but transforming, returning to a light that has been waiting for us all along. As the Buddhists say, we're not a wave disappearing into the ocean. We're a wave realizing we've always been the ocean. I glimpsed that reality once, on a night that should have been my last but instead became my beginning. And soon enough, I'll experience it fully, not just as a visitor, but as one returning home. Until then, I remain grateful for each day, each breath, each moment of connection. And I remain certain of what waits beyond the veil, not as a matter of faith or hope, but of experience. That's not a bad legacy for an old soldier to leave behind. Not bad at all.